It's time to get out to the Rude Guest Hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV, and welcome in our guest from The Athletic. That is Sam Blum. You can follow him on Twitter at SamBlum3. Sam, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, man.
So you recently wrote an article before the moves made with Rizzo and Davey, talking about how before the season, Davey, Rizzo, those guys, even some players with the team kind of talked about, hey, we need to get back to winning ways. We need to get to a spot where we're competing for something other than just last place.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up in the spot where they're in right now. How much do you think that played into the decision that we saw on Sunday where they ultimately dismissed Rizzo and Martinez?
I just think it seemed like a little bit of a situation where the players, the coaches, nobody could really explain why they were in the position they were in. I even go back a couple weeks before that when, Davey was talking about how none of this was on his coaching staff. And, I think the implication of that is that this is on the players. And, you get into a situation where nobody feels like they're on the same page. I don't think maybe there's not as much trust in the coaching staff. Maybe there's a bit of a fracture there. And that could be the explanation that nobody really wants to say. I mean, I want, for that article, I wanted to sit down with Davey one-on-one, but, the PR staff said I couldn't. And then I went out and approached Davey himself, and he was like, no, I'm busy. I got to go ahead. And he never, made an effort to actually answer any of my questions, in that type of setting. So it was just really like get the one question into him. And I just don't think anybody really wanted to explain why they were in the position they were in. And, ultimately, it's because it's gone really poorly. And I think that's probably why they made this move.
When you look at that team, for me, I don't think they have enough talent on the team to compete. So if they voiced that the rebuild was over and they really believe that, then I can understand. But if anybody looks at that team, they know there's not enough talent for them to be competing at a high enough level.
I mean, I think that there's enough talent to be better than where they're at. I mean, the last two seasons they won 71 games each. I think you could have reasonably expected with some of those players progressing a little bit. Some of the veterans that they brought in, this team would be at least better. And I don't think anybody thought they'd be competing with maybe the Mets and the Phillies,
mm-hmm.
Or even the Braves, obviously, who are in their own kind of malaise themselves. But I think people thought the Nationals would be a better team, and they just simply are a last place team. Even the Marlins, who kind of restarted their rebuild like 4 years after the Nationals, seem to be in a better position right now than DC. So it just felt like this was turning from a rebuild to just kind of like a perpetual stagnation. And so, yeah, they had to make some sort of decision. It's a little surprising, maybe some of the timing of it, but if you don't trust your front office to make the picks in the draft, then maybe this is why they had to do that. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but I think that could be.
Talking with Sam Blum from The Athletic about the Nationals, and I'm curious because you don't cover the Nationals on a daily basis. You cover the Angels, you also cover Major League Baseball as a whole, but I'm curious, when you look at Mike Rizzo, everyone around here, or at least a lot of people around here, still talked about him with a lot of reverence, and understandably so. He was the architect of the 2019 team that won the World Series and the decade of the 2010s that led to a lot of success for the team. But I'm curious, with how things have changed around baseball to where we're at now, was he still viewed as a top executive, one of the top guys, or we may be a little bit biased toward Mike Rizzo in terms of what his actual view is around Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of a mixture, right? If you win a World Series, I think you earn the reverence, in my opinion, just based on the accomplishment alone, right? Like there's an element to that where it can never be taken from you, and you don't win a World Series by accident either. So you have to I think appreciate that he built a team, both through some really high draft picks, obviously, but also by some great decisions in free agency. You look at like Max Scherzer being very very probably one of the best free agent signings ever, I would say. So it's they made some really good decisions, but I think when you look in the last few years, maybe some of what they were doing was a little outdated. I know the Washington Post has covered that pretty well, like the technology, some of the elements of maybe strategy. I think that's probably maybe the way he was viewed as someone that had accomplished so much, but also maybe was kind of not updating the way they needed to operate to do that again. And I think that's certainly how I viewed it. And I think when you win in Major League Baseball, like I spent the last weekend in Colorado covering the White Sox and the Rockies, and it's not to say that the Nationals are any comparison to them, but I do think that when you're not doing the same strategies as the rest of the competitive teams in Major League Baseball in this modern era of Major League Baseball, you're going to fall behind, and possibly by quite a lot. You're seeing it with some of the really, really bad franchises, but you don't want as a Nationals organization to even go in close to that direction.
So you heard the comments about them not having this pitching machine that most teams have. And I know a lot of people in this town played that the learners wouldn't spend the money. Well, if you're saying that a guy is stuck in the old school way, they may not want to do some of those things. Could that have been, like, I know the narrative is that the learners wouldn't give them the money. Was it just that they didn't go out and try to get that product?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly. It's tough for me to speak too authoritatively on that. I was reading, like I said, in the Washington Post about Mike DiBartolo, I think being more analytically driven. I mean, to some extent that could be, in an ownership issue, and I think there probably is an element of truth to that, right? The ownership, and even just look at the payroll. I mean, payroll is down from where it was when they were really competitive, in the 2010s. I mean, that's a fact, and I think that's something that would tie directly to ownership. But yeah, I mean, there's also just like strategic ways of handling your front office that, from what I've read, it sounds like that their interim might be more embracing than Rizzo ever did. So yeah, I mean, it's everyone's got their strategy. Some things work, some things don't. But I think if you're not operating like a very, very modern major league franchise, you're probably going to, feel some pains from that.
I'm assuming you were out there for the series where they took 2 of 3 from the Angels not that long ago. One of the really the final series that Davey had as a manager. What were your takeaways from being around the ball club, just in general? Because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Because Barry Svrluga, the Washington Post, I'm sure you read this piece as well. You mentioned you've read a bunch from the Post recently. He talked about how Davey, Rizzo, and then even here on our station 106.7 The Fan with the Sports Junkies, he kind of mentioned that there was an air of comfortability, almost complacency at times, maybe from Davey, maybe from Rizzo, but also a little bit from the players. Did you get that sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it was just from talking to those guys. I think that was what kind of came through in the article, which was, yeah, I mean, like no one really understood what was happening. But at the same time, I think if you're the players, I can't blame them if they feel like a little bit detached from the organization when the manager is going out there and saying, none of this is on the coaches. I mean,
Yeah.
It's I think if you're a player, like you want to feel like, okay, we're all dealing with this together, and I think there's a chance you could lose a clubhouse. It's very, very, very hard to get a clubhouse back if you've lost it. And they played really poorly after that comment. I mean, they lost a lot of games. They almost got swept by the Rockies. I mean, this is. I think that that's the way I look at it. Like if you as a manager can't take responsibility, your coaches aren't taking responsibility for the failures, then the players are probably going to be like, well, I'm not going to take responsibility. And that was kind of the sense I got walking in that clubhouse. Was everyone was like, yeah, I don't know, man. It's just we think we're better than this, but it's what it is. And that's that I think translates to what Barry wrote, like you said, and just like an air of complacency, but. I don't think that starts with the players. I think that starts from the top and it goes down to the players.
Well, Sam, you're looking at DiBartolo and also Cairo, both two guys that were on this staff that was here with Rizzo and also Davey. Do you expect a big change? I know sometimes coaches are on staff, and if you're not the leader, you don't get your say. Do you expect something different moving forward?
I think that's why you make a move like this. It's not always because you sit here and say, Miguel Cairo is our best chance to, win a World Series this year. But, you hope to mix things up, I think, and, get a voice in there that people respect, that, everyone could kind of recalibrate and be like, we're going to do things a little differently. I think that's important. I think it's important for a manager in this position to step in and say, we're going to mend fences to some extent. We're going to fix this. I don't know if that means the Nationals are going to go on a crazy run like they did, 6 years ago and make the playoffs. But I do think that there's a chance you could see them, maybe playing a little more inspired, maybe playing a little bit more like this matters to everybody. And, that's what you do. When you make a move like this, it's to shake things up and to signal to the team, to signal to the players, to signal to the fan base that this wasn't working and we needed a new voice. And I think people respected David Martinez. I mean, he obviously won a World Series. He had a lot of success. but you also, I mean, there is something to the fact that like these jobs, I think, are very finite in the amount of time you can actually be in them, and there's always going to be an end date on it. And this was just where it ended up for Davey, in my opinion. Like he had been in this organization maybe too long, had that seat too long, and it was starting to, I think, cost the organization, and so they needed to make a move.
Talking with Sam Blum from The Athletic here on BMitch and Finlay. Toby Altizer sitting in for JP this week. On a positive note, I know we've spent plenty of time talking negative about the organization with Rizzo and Davey being let go, but James Wood is a massive bright spot. Seeing what he's been able to do this season, how impressed have you been watching from afar and then getting to see him in person? How impressed were you when you got to see him?
Yeah, no, he's one of the best players in baseball, and I think the funny thing, we talk all about Rizzo. I mean, at the end of the day, he made one of the best trades, I think, in modern baseball history with Juan Soto and what they got back. It's just he didn't do enough other good things. But that, like you said, like that, getting James Wood, getting C.J. Abrams, getting Mackenzie Gore. I mean, these are three All-Star caliber players. I know Abrams still needs to maybe find his way in, but they should all be All-Stars, and certainly James Wood is one of the best young players in baseball, young superstar. I mean, this is a guy that could be like a kind of Juan Soto type of talent. So it's just that was an excellent trade. The Nationals have some pieces to build around. I mean, that's why I think you make these moves. I mean, you have enough. You have Dylan Cruz. You have James Wood. You have some of the best young talent in Major League Baseball, and they should be better. I mean, that's just the beginning, middle, and end of it. And now maybe they're putting themselves in a position to actually elevate some of this talent to the point where they can be better.
Now, this is like they weren't held accountable, and now I'm wondering, hell, can James Wood be better? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If he could be better, then he didn't get there because of some of the complacency. Then maybe this is the right move, although the timing is off.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if James Wood could get any better, then that would be dangerous for the rest of baseball.
No question about it. One final one for me, Sam. When you look at the guys that are on this roster, that with the trade deadline coming up, Mike DiBartolo going to be able to kind of leave his imprint with the draft, and then what he does at the trade deadline. Are there guys that you think are reasonably attractive that contenders are going to want to go after from this Nationals roster?
Yeah, maybe like a Kyle Finnegan. I think probably was the name that jumps out to me. Just I know that you don't want to subtract too much from the Nationals bullpen, given what it's been like. But he'd probably be one of the best relief names out there. Like in the Nathaniel Lowe or something like that. But yeah, they don't have a ton of guys that really stand out as super valuable, like maybe Paul DeYoung. But I would think Finnegan's probably the number one name on that list, and hopefully he can get something back. But the Nationals obviously will be adding in the next couple of weeks with their number one overall pick. They have a lot of good young players in their system already, so it's it's not like a make or break trade deadline for them, as I would say, which maybe played into why they made this move when they did. But it's still an important one, and I think you got to maximize. Anything you can really get at this point is what they should be very aggressive. Even if it is like a Paul DeYoung, who's not going to be incredibly valuable, but might be able to latch on for a prospect or two, then just do it. Just acquire whatever you can, whatever young talent can. Keep infusing your system, and I think that's probably the best strategy they can have. But there's not a ton of great, obvious at least trade deadline chips unless they want to make some more aggressive moves with even some of the younger players or players under team control for multiple years.
Sam, as you look at this draft coming up, has any player stood out as the number one consensus guy, or is it multiple guys? Because normally when a guy's the number one consensus, that's easy to pick. When you have two or three guys, you got to choose the best one. Then you show me your talent.
And it's interesting because it's I think the reason why this draft is interesting is that you have kind of two different groups of very available, interesting players, which is like young high school infielders and some really great college pitchers. And it really depends on where the Nationals kind of view their priorities. I mean, they could also always go Seth Hernandez at number one, which is an interest. You don't usually see that from a right-handed pitcher, high school pitcher. That almost never goes number one overall, but he's a supreme talent, so that's an option too. But really, I think it comes down to whether they want to build around a young high school shortstop or go for a more ready-made collegiate pitcher like Kate Anderson, Liam Doyle, Jamie Arnold type player like that, or if they want to go Ethan Holiday which I would think probably makes the most sense. Ethan Holiday probably is the more consensus number 1 overall pick, or like Billy Carlson or Eli Willits or something like that. But my guess is they'll probably just make the obvious choice here and go Holiday. But there's different avenues they can go, and I think it really comes down to if they are willing to be patient on a high school infielder or want to infuse that system with a pitcher that they can basically put in the big leagues, either by the end of this year or, middle of next year.
If you were making the pick, would you go Holiday?
I'm not a scout, but I would go with the talent that you think has the most upside. And if generally I would say that, Holiday or, Willits or Carlson, like those players, those are the most valuable players out there. And that's probably what I would do. But you also got to trust your player development system. And, there's not a ton of trust in that right now. So there's, that's always something to consider too.
Yeah. Appreciate the time, Sam. Fantastic piece. And obviously you were just a bit ahead of the news that was to come a couple of days later.
Always, yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on, guys.